officially call the meeting to order at 5:32 and welcome everybody. We have a lot of topics to cover. We've put some guidelines here in terms of minutes, but we don't have buzzers or anything like that. So some of these things, naturally, topics flow from one to the other. I'd like to point out, and I'm new to this, so if I don't sound as well informed as some of you that have been at it, I don't think you've been at it for 53 years, Mr. Brown, but a lot of years. But this is a joint meeting, and I want to put an emphasis on joint. This is not the school board's meeting, and this is not the Vero Beach chapter of the NAACP. This is a joint meeting. The objective here is to come out of here feeling better about the relationship, feeling better about what's been accomplished and or what needs to be done in order to move forward and ultimately to reach unity status. So I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Brown, and the floor is yours, sir.
Good evening. First, before I go, I would Mrs. Pender, who's our education chair, I wanted her to read something. This is straight from the joint plan, if you would, Mrs. Pender.
Purpose and mission. The School Board of Indian River County, Florida, School Board and the Indian River County branch of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Indian River NAACP will work collaboratively and cooperatively towards their shared goal of achieving a fully desegregated school system under the matter style Sharpton et al. Versus School Board of Indian River County, Florida, number 164-CV-00721, SD, Florida. In furtherance of this goal, the school board will create an equity committee that reports directly to the school board and shall be responsible for monitoring and documenting compliance with the August 2018 desegregation order and for making recommendations to the board. Based on its records of compliance with prior orders and the data and information exchanged, the School District of Indian River County School District has already achieved unitary status in the area of facilities, non-instructional staff, and administrative staff. And the purpose of the Equity Committee is to maintain a high level of accountability to the school board and citizenry in ensuring compliance with the remaining requirements of the August 2018 order and facilitating the achievement of full unitary status. As discussed further in Section 5, while the parties agree.
That's good. Yeah, that's it. And one other thing, my secretary, Mrs. Wright, we just passed out something, and some of you had it, 3 of you previously, and it's the mission statement and the vision statement of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It reads, our mission is to secure the political, educational, social, and economic equality of rights in order to eliminate race-based discrimination and ensure the health and well-being of all persons. The persistence of the NAACP is clear, especially in its campaign against any form of personal rights violations. Our vision, NAACP vision statement, is to ensure a society in which all individuals have equal rights without discrimination based on race. This statement represents the leadership vow of this organization and its determination to emerge victoriously. It can be divided into promote an inclusive society, uphold equal rights for all, making America a home of everyone remains the primary objective of the NAACP. That is why the organization is actively involved in exposing any social evils targeted at race, whereas they are such as comment relates to the duty of upholding the rights of all citizens. Ladies and gentlemen, We met last night in our executive session, and we're not pleased. We have felt disrespected. We felt that we have been misrepresented. Our board, our presence is not our input. Dr. Andrew Spar says equality and all is good, but inclusion is paramount. But it's not just having me sit at the table, but my thought process and my beliefs be included in the totality of whatever is being done or said. We do not feel that we are being treated that way. We came in this thing, and as I've said over and over, the Indian River County NAACP is an advocate group. We are advocating for the children of Indian River County, especially the children of color in this district. This is a 53-year-old situation that should have been cleared up. I cannot, in all honesty, allow it to go on. I cannot allow knee-jerk decisions to be made that was going to adversely affect my children. We felt that there were three, and my secretary have them, there are three different agendas. And it should have been collaboration, but I didn't feel it was collaboration. The first was a draft by Dr. Moore. I responded to the board, which I felt this is not Dr. Moore's meeting. This is Indian River County, NAACP, Indian River County Board, School Board. So I directed mine to the board and Mr. Barefoot as the chairman. Later on, it was changed. He and I just talked about it. We were infuriated that all of this was put on a time clock, that we were going to be timed, that we wanted an hour. We were especially persistent in the fact that we wanted an open dialogue, that we could discuss and have an understanding. We can converse. We could have thoughts, that we could talk about things seriously and not be relegated to a watch or a stopwatch or an hour's time limit. We left the last one, Mrs. Barenberg, Dr. Schiff, Ms. Rosario. We hung about 45 minutes after the meeting interfacing with each other. We thought we were moving forward. We have documentation that the things that you said in that meeting were not adhered to. They were not done. We had a change of leadership. We went to Miami, and Judge Williams said, this is a collaboration. The Equity Committee is a federally mandated committee. But it doesn't appear that people feel that we are relevant. And if we are not going to do this as equals, I was instructed by my board, my executive committee last night, if we are not going to do this as equals and be included, and our thought process is part of the agenda, then we think that we need to let a judge decide. We spend a lot of money. The NAACP don't have money. But ladies and gentlemen, I refuse to continuously be bullied and reported. Y'all being reports coming on us that we are being obstructionists. We're not going along. We are on the battleground with our children and watching up close the atrocities that a lack of education and inclusiveness is doing to our children and to our community. I have a book here. It's a dissertation done on a master's where, as a 14-year-old boy, I'm in this book, suffering 53 years later, the same things that's in this book. It's unacceptable. Either we're going to do it right, ladies and gentlemen, or let's let a judge tell us who's right and who's wrong. We have a plan. It's not perfect. It needs tweaking. But we have not afforded the opportunity to see if it works or if it don't work. In the initial year, Mrs. Barenberg, Dr. Schiff, and Ms. Rosario, you witnessed it, that a lot of wrongs were done, that the process was not done right. The inclusion was not right. We started out a new year. COVID hit. I have all of these documents that supposed to validate the elements of the African American Achievement Plan. I constantly say, God has blessed us with a group of people who love to read. We read with understanding, comprehension, analysis, and discernment. We don't agree. And if you want to, you can hire a private consultant to go through it and tell us we're wrong. But my thing is, there's no need for us to get embarked in this conversation, anything, if we are not going to look at each other as equals and do what's best for children. What you do for these African-American children is going to benefit all children. Ms. Barenberg, she knows for 17 years I worked with her husband with children of all colors, creeds, races, everything. I was a Little League umpire and coach for 17 years. She and her husband and I did this together. I care about children. But we will not be bullied. We will not be belittled. We will not be misinterpreted. And if we're going to do it right, we applaud the opportunity to sit down with you all. But if it's not going to be that way, I don't think we should waste each other's time. We should go let a judge tell us how do we move forward. And that's per my executive board, what we met last night. Because, see, I can't make these decisions by myself. And I have to report them to state and national because we are being watched by both of them. So that's my 2 cents before we go any further, and that's all I needed, Mr. Barefoot, is to put that on the table, that we're in a situation where we need to sit down and understand if we really want to do this or if we're going to do it right. Thank you.
Well, obviously we want to do it right. And obviously, you're frustrated with what you perceive to be the lack of progress. And as I said, I'm new to this, but my colleagues have been here a couple of years. In fairness, and it's not an excuse, but it's a reality, COVID for the last 6, 7, 8 months has been a challenge for the district to look after the health and safety and welfare of the students, the faculty, teachers, the staff, and I'm not sure where the breakdown has come, but I have an observation, and I might be wrong, and I will defer to my colleagues. You brought a lot of binders there. That's a lot of information. The quality of that information, I could never read that much information myself, so I applaud you and your colleagues for doing so. One of my observations, and this is my words, and they may or may not be appropriate, I don't think there's been enough focus on goals or specific action steps, measurable action steps that together we agree on the goals, and there are 4 major goals, that much I know. But for example, under academic achievements, there's somewhere in the neighborhood of, and I've got a number here, 38 different action steps. That's a lot of action steps. One of the goals is to reduce the disproportionality that exists in ESE program. There's only 6 action steps there. Reduce disparity in the discipline of kids. There's 14 action steps there, and there's 32 in increased employment of teachers of color. That's 90 action steps. That's a monumental task of dealing with that many action steps. And I'll just throw this out, and then I would be happy to turn it over to Mrs. Barenberg or Dr. Schiff or any of my colleagues. It's very hard to get stuff done when the communication is via email, even over the telephone. And my suggestion is that, and I'm more than happy to facilitate this and sit in a room with representatives from your organization, Dr. Warrior virtually, and welcome, Dr. Warrior, by the way. And the appropriate people at the district, and go through each one of these things so that we may be in agreement, exactly what the goal is, and let's review all these action steps, and perhaps we can shrink it down a bit. And then Dr. Moore, working with me and the appropriate people in the district, and take these one at a time, and start with the ESE one, because there's only 6 action steps. And go through this step by step and get agreement. I don't want to think that the district is the one dictating. You're the ones that feel that these various categories are deficient, and I think, frankly, we can make a lot of progress if we sit in a room and literally go at these step by step by step. Ms. Green?
Just to respond to what you're saying about the action steps and the goals. So basically, that was equity committee working in that capacity with the school district, and the purpose of the action steps is to ensure uniformity across the district. So you can set goals, and they could be specific, but if our district has not encountered reaching these goals, which is what Mr. Brown is frustrated about for 53 years, we have not, there needs to be some type of direction. So what we did with the action steps is to ensure that there is uniformity and that the entire district understands how to get there. So that is basically a blueprint. So it does seem extensive because it's a blueprint for Dr. Moore's staff on how to get there. But Dr. Moore governs that and the actions that are taken and how that is reached. With this desegregation order, the goals, we do believe that they are measurable for the most part. With them, there are some that still could be more defined, but that's what we're working on. That's why we have not met the desegregation order, because we have not quite figured that out. So I just wanted to just further explain about the action steps.
I get
why
it,
they are.
and the last comment I would make, and then I'll hand it off. I think a lot of work has been done. You all seen a draft of the specifics for the time period of March through September. It's still in draft form. I think perhaps the disconnect is that what the school district perceives it has delivered on many of these action steps, and what you all feel has not met what was, in your mind, the agreed-upon outcome of each action step. Is what's missing is some documentation, some very specific documentation consistently presented in a format that's easily recognizable and understood by all. And this is just my interpretation. As I said, I'm sort of new to this, and there's a lot of information, but in the world that I grew up in the business world, if you have a problem like this and you sit down and you've got to achieve and you've got a goal, and in this case, the court set a time frame, we've agreed on the goals, and we're not making progress, it's because the communication is lacking. I'm not blaming anyone. It's been a difficult last 6 months. But I suspect if we can get 2 or 3 representatives, and I'm happy to facilitate, we can't all be in the room at the same time. But I'm more than happy to facilitate spending as much time as necessary over the next couple of months to start to knock some of these things off. And in talking with Dr. Moore, I'm sure he's prepared to commit the appropriate people. We don't need a big group, just a small group, and take them step by step by step. And if we can consolidate some of this, that'd be better yet. So I'm sure
If I may,
everybody...
before, Mr. Barefoot, but before we can do that, it's like the game of baseball, football. We have to understand the rules of the game, how the game is going to be played, and who has what positions. Because if it's willy-nilly, which it has been all out of whack, when we, the 5 of you, and me and all of those who are on virtual, plus the ones that are here, we are the team. And we have to set some parameters. We have to interpret what the judge said, that these decisions do not belong, the finality of these decisions belong amongst us. That we are equal partners, that it's not my basketball, I'm gonna play with it the way I want it, and either you play that way or you don't get to play. We're not gonna do that any longer. So we need to define the roles. The Equity Committee, it was strategic. The implementation of it was strategic to make sure that we had a group of people that sat and was able, but from day one, I know none of you have, maybe Ms. Barrenberg, maybe Dr. Schiff and Dr. Jones, maybe you admit you haven't. How many people, other than those in the NAACP, has read this? All of that data? I'm serious. And Mrs. Barrenberg, when you have Ms. Nautilus Sanders, who's on education, on our equity committee, now you have Mrs. Pender, they have lives. You have Mrs. Green. Now, she's bad as me and Dr. Warrior and all that. She works, we read. We read, and read. You know, we can call each other in the midnight and we're reading. Because as I told Dr. Moore, I've told every superintendent, when I come in the room and I open my mouth, I'm prepared. I have done my research. I'm not just talking to hear myself talk. I'm a talker, but I don't talk to hear myself talk. It is my responsibility for these children that we are watching being destroyed in this district. It's my responsibility. So once we identify the game, the players, and how it's going to be played, then I think what you were saying, Mr. Barefoot, may be plausible. But right now,
Well, you know, history is for historians. I'm more inclined to look forward. I understand that you learn from history. There's a good basis. You've all agreed to that. I just think that the execution is perhaps where we've missed the boat in many of these things. There's probably more progress been made than maybe you think. On the other hand, perhaps the progress hasn't been delivered or communicated in the best possible manner. I don't know. I'm not passing judgment. I'm just observing. Mrs. Rosario has had her hand up, and she's getting tired down there, so.
Thank you. Make sure this is on. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your time. For those of you who are watching virtually, Mr. Brown, Mrs. Green, thank you for coming here and for representing, obviously, the children of this county. My hand is up because there were several comments that were made that I would like to comment on. And for clarity, because we have two new school board members who may not know much of the history of when we all met last year for the first time with Dr. Moxley. Dr. Moore was not here, and so that information, I encourage new board members to go back and watch the video of that meeting, because that was the first of any time that we met together. This board met with the NAACP and our equity chair, Mrs. Green. One thing I just wanted to, before I ask a question and a comment to Mr. Brown, Mr. Barefoot, as noble as it is for you to offer to sit down with Mr. Brown and Dr. Moore, it isn't a single board member's job to do that. It is a collective work that an entire board together needs to work on together. And yes, we all can meet, just like we're meeting now. We all can sit in a room. We've got to schedule it, but we've got to all sit down and meet together to that end. So one of the, let me mention the agenda. I do not create the agenda for this meeting. we are offered the agenda, and obviously, the time that are on here are guidelines. I'm speaking for Dr. Moore, please correct me if I'm wrong. They're guidelines to kind of keep us on track, but nobody's ringing a bell, obviously. So I'm sure that there's really no strictness about the time limits that are on here. So I really don't want, I hope that that is not going to be really an issue of contention. I think we have other issues bigger than the agenda, and I hope that you agree with that. The collaboration on the agenda, I think it's my understanding that the NAACP was collaborated on the agenda, as it was a request of the NAACP to meet with us, and as a result, the agenda was created. I'm just sharing with you my knowledge on that. The other thing that I wanted to just make clear for those who are watching and who are listening, even though we have this long legal battle, I believe that last year, we, with the new board, not this board, the previous board, obviously, I believe we made some waves to change things. I want to agree that the ball has not been rolling fast enough, and it has not been, and maybe COVID was an issue, change of leadership certainly was an issue. When the, and Mrs. Green can attest to this, when the Equity Committee first began, because our job was to begin the work of selecting an Equity Committee, creating an Equity Committee, and then having the Equity Committee establish when they were going to meet and what they were going to meet on and all of that stuff. Mrs. Green can attest, when the Equity Committee first began, it was a mess, right? You weren't getting the rooms, who was going to help you, how were you going to get everybody together, and when was that going to happen, and the dates. And so, you know, things have a starting place. And the last Equity Committee that I attended as an observer, it was beautiful, it was wonderful, it was organized, it was established. We even had a community member bring cookies. But there was an agenda set. There was data that was talked about. It was night and day from the first Equity Committee. Am I correct in that? Is it where I don't sit on the committee, but is it where we were? No. Is it where we want to be? Probably not. But I do want to say, in my observation, that I think that we have been making strides. I just don't want the perception that we're doing absolutely nothing, and we have been doing absolutely nothing. And when I say we, I mean collectively all of us. So on that end, with regard to the Equity Committee, there have been some improvements along the way. And certainly, I am sure that we can make better improvements. But I think that the work that the Equity Committee has done has been significant, because based on the information that I know and that I have been given, the work of the Equity Committee has been brought back to the district, and all of the feedback has led us to what transpired over the summer. And as a result, we created the African American Achievement Plan. Dr. Moore, am I correct on that? So the work that was done to to get us to the point of, you know, creating an African American Achievement Plan, having community input, having the Equity Committee's input, having NAACP's input, having board input, having every staff input, school input. I think a year ago, this past summer, we didn't have that. We didn't have that, but we do now. And it was just created in August. Is it perfect? Probably not. But again, is it where we were? No. Is it where we want to be? No. Everything needs improvement, but we have made strides. We have created a plan that we could work with. And I'm not settling. I don't want to seem as I'm settling here. I'm trying to bring light to the work that has been done, because there has been work done. On that end, I also want to add for those, and Mr. Brown, I know that you know this, the work of the board in all of this, our name as the board is on court papers, right? We are the school district, the board of Indian River County. But the board members, by statute, by law, we are not the police. We don't manage the day-to-day operations of the school district. Dr. Moore does. So we're more like traffic cops. You know, we direct the board, we direct Dr. Moore, and Dr. Moore has got to get it done. So to that extent, when we all met with Dr. Moxley together, what we all agreed was that we were going to periodically meet together, just like we're meeting now. And that was last fall, if I recall. We didn't meet in the spring, which I believe we intended to, and then COVID hit. So I think this meeting should have been more September, October time, so that we could prepare for the December report that needs to be sent to the courts. I hope I'm not getting my timeline wrong. So unfortunately, we didn't meet in the spring. I think what I'm trying to also wrap my thoughts around where we were, where we are, and where we need to go. I welcome more meetings with you all anytime, because the bottom line is we all want the best for kids. But I also, like I said, I don't want, the word was willy-nilly, I don't want the impression to be that the district is not doing anything. We have been doing. Now, my question, finally, Mr. Brown, one of the main points that you have made in your introduction was that you do not feel like you all have been a part of the process. Am I correct in that?
My statement is inclusion.
Inclusion.
We're sitting at the table, but what we bring to the table is not being adhered to.
So,
It's not it's not relevant in our opinion.
so with the work that we have been doing so far, you've been there all along. So my question is, if you can help myself and my colleagues understand, can you mention something specific
Yes.
that you feel?
Yes. The African American Achievement Plan, we didn't sign off on that. We
Or
were
what?
never in agreement with it.
I'm sorry?
The African American Achievement Plan,
You were a part of that.
we were never in agreement
Our
with it.
equity committee was a part of that as well.
W-
The
And-
entire community was a part of the creation of the African American Achievement Plan. And I believe Dr. Moore has even said that you have sat in multiple meetings with him and Mrs. Warrior as well. Dr. Moore, can you, I'm just looking for clarity. I'm not trying to point fingers. I'm just trying to understand what has been happening. Has Mr. Brown and Mrs. Warrior and Mrs. Green?
As you recall, we brought the initial African American Achievement Plan to the board. Mr. Brown spoke at that particular meeting.
Mike, your mic.
In dialogue with the board, I pulled the African American Achievement Plan, circled back with Mr. Brown, with Ms. Warrior, to make the shifts that were asked for. And then we brought the plan back.
Ms. Green, you wanted to
So
respond?
was Mr. Brown a part of the creation of the African American Achievement?
In the creation of the African American Achievement Plan, we had a number of meetings that were, one was a opportunity to come together over a course of a day, looking step-by-step plan, action plan by action plan, receiving that information. Dr. Warrior was there, Claudia Wall was there, Mr. Brown was there in the morning. We put the plan together, received feedback, continued to make feedback. Mr. Brown expressed when we initially brought it, very similar to as he's expressing now, that did not feel, although was present, was being heard in the creation of the plan. He's been consistent in saying that. As we brought it back, once again, circled back, made shifts and modifications to the plan, sent it for initial feedback, made additional changes, and then brought it back for the board.
Okay. May I just end with one question, please, sir? Mr. Barefoot, I
Yes,
don't
go
want to
ahead.
dominate, but I think it's important. Mr. Brown, I know that there are probably multiple things that you would like different in the African American Achievement Plan, but based on what I'm hearing so far, I just have one question for you. If there were one thing only, one thing, other than the multiple, because I don't want to dominate the time, if there was one thing in the African American Achievement Plan that you want different, what would that be?
That would be disingenuous for me to answer that, because it's a multitude, it's a totality of things that I'm not in agreement with.
I'm just trying to get an idea of what it is that
I'm
you would.
giving you a straight answer, because, and I appreciate what Dr. Moore said, I was in the room. I walked out of one of the meetings because I was upset. I was conveying some information on one aspect, one element, I think it's 1.3 or 1.4, something in there. And it was told to me that this is in progress. I differed with that opinion. I was told that was my opinion, but I'm living this. I walked out of it because, and I told him, I was man enough to tell him, Dr. Moore, I can't sit here and go through this because we're going nowhere fast. And Mrs. Rosario, I use an analogy that a friend of mine who happens to be white, he came to me, he was doing an event about a black man, for black people, and nobody black was on the committee. That's what I'm talking about, inclusion, being at the table, being heard, being a part of it. You were using this that I was there. There doesn't entail being a part of it. Being there doesn't entail having my voice heard. Being there does not entail getting my points into the paperwork. Being there is just saying being there, and a lot of times, Ms. Rosario, I refuse to attend stuff so it don't give the appearance that I'm rubber stamping it. Because see, sometimes my appearance lead people to say, well, Mr. Brown was there. So I recuse myself in a lot of cases so that I don't give that appearance that I'm going along with it. Because you said it several times, well, Mr. Brown, you were there. You were in the room. I was in the room, Mrs. Rosario, but I did not feel included.
You know, there's a difference between hearing and listening. And and there is a big difference. Ms. Green, you wanted to comment.
Yeah, so I just want to go back to what Mr. Brown was saying about you all both being on the document. So basically, his plea at the initial when I came in is that he's not feeling like they're being treated as equal parties in this lawsuit. For instance, when status reporting happens, it is what the district drafts up, and if he is not okay with certain points, it has in the past been a attachment or something that is secondary, supplemental. And what they're saying is you all are equal parties when it comes to like even this meeting, discussing this agenda. Are we okay with time restraints being on here. No, we're not okay with it. We're not putting that. You know, when he says about inclusion, what he means is not, I'm not invited. He means I am invited. I feel included. I feel like I belong here, and what I'm saying is heard and is being considered before anything final happens. And I agree that the culture has not gotten there. It has been the board directed or superintendent directed, I guess maybe because it's the facilities of the district or the board being used. And also another breakdown with the equity committee is the two parties on the papers are not meeting. It is the superintendent who is being monitored meeting with one of the parties. And that basically defeats the purpose of the equity committee because it is to monitor the district. So if it is monitoring the district, the person who is the CFO or CEO of the monitoring entity would not be the one discussing what is being reported on its behalf. It would be the two parties determining what is going to be reported. And so that kind of breaks it down. So just to go back to what Mr. Brown, because I didn't know if it was effectively communicated or understood. But I think that is the initial thing to determine, like, okay, first, are you all going to be meeting quarterly or even more often to discuss concerns so that we're not here and we don't have frustration like this? It is continuous conversation. And then after that, how are you all meeting with the superintendent? Is it still Mr. Brown meeting with the superintendent, or now is it the entire board, superintendent, and Mr. Brown meeting? Maybe just to get clarity. And then to talk about 2019, what Ms. Rosario was saying, we did spend a lot of time creating infrastructure for the equity committee. The joint plan was extremely vague in our recommendations to the board. We put measurable goals in there and set expectations. The board agreed to those goals. Dr. Moxley made up a chart on a timeline, basically, on how to achieve those goals. And so that's where we started from this year. But I believe that those are some of the things that Dr. Moore does not agree with what the board agreed to with Dr. Moxley. And if that's the case, then you all have to decide today, are you affirming those recommendations, or how you all are moving forward with that as well?
Mr. Barefoot?
Go ahead.
Dr.
Okay.
Jones?
Thank you.
I'd like to speak after Dr. Jones, please.
Okay.
Just good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I'm new on the board, but I've been in the community 40 years and now 32 years in the school district. And after listening to this, and I've known Mr. Brown since he coached at Sebastian River High School, and he would never share this with you, but he was the one who was always making sure the coaches at Sebastian River High School that the students were online academically. They would be late for practice if they had work to do. So he's just not saying it, he does it. I just look at this and say there's nowhere we can go but collaboration. And I know it's going to take a facilitator to work with the board and the NAACP, but I think it can be done. I've sent it to Dr. Moore and I've sent it to Mr. Brown and a few others. I don't want another penny spent on this. We have spent close to $1 million on partial unitary status for 3 areas that we had when I was a principal at Sebastian River High School: facilities, support staff, and administration. We do not need to spend money except if it's on our children. I have read several times the DSEC plan from '67, from '94, the joint plan, and the federally mandated equity committee. And I do agree with what Mershawn was saying. We were getting some movement on that. I really think we were. I was attending those meetings. And yes, COVID happened, so we're taking a step back, and everybody had to take a step back and say, okay, here's where we are and here's where we need to go. But I think the key issue here is trust. And when you have trust, you're going to be okay with moving forward. Our 4 areas, and I know it's a whole bunch of paperwork, and I've read it: academic achievement, discipline and suspension, ESE, and the recruiting of African American teachers. I really think if we separate those goals and work on that a little bit at a time, looking at what the equity committee has already done for us, let's not rewrite it. A lot of work went into those meetings, a lot of work. Let's not rewrite it, but let's move forward, not spend any money. Let's be an example for what we can do. Our country is divided. Right now, we're in a really tough time. I don't want the school district and the county and the community being divided. I know we can do this if we work together and establish trust. Thank you.
Dr. Schiff?
Yeah, I've got a few thoughts from the conversation that we've had so far. First off, Mr. Brown, I want to acknowledge the frustration that I hear and the ways that you outlined that. I want to affirm that and acknowledge it in you. You know, as a board, we can't talk, and with all due respect, I was concerned about this agenda as well. I was concerned that it limited the amount of time we would get to speak together, and as we don't get to speak together often, it's significant when we have the time to come together that we give it the attention it deserves, irrespective of the clock. And I hear you on that. You mentioned a couple of things, and there's a bunch that's built up. You mentioned something about a consultant. And I want to make sure I understand that right, because one of the things that I keep hearing in this is it's like we're speaking different languages. It's like we come to meetings, or it's like when you meet with Dr. Moore, and I've expressed this to Dr. Moore, I've expressed it to Dr. Warrior, and I think I've expressed it to you too. And I probably expressed it to Ms. Green as well. There's something that's missing in our communication. We're saying words and we're speaking English, but the words that we're using are not having the same meaning to each of us. And we think that we're communicating, and it's like one of us is speaking Greek and one of us is speaking Japanese, and some of the sounds are the same, so we think we're understanding, and we're not. And I am as frustrated as you are by that. So when you speak about, you mentioned a consultant, and I don't know if that comes from something that you're requesting, or if it's something that's been discussed between you and, obviously we.
Oh, no, I was saying because we have read it and we don't feel that it is adequate or it does anything but fluff. If you don't agree with us, don't take our word, have a consultant look at it. That's what I was saying.
Okay. I agree with you, and I agree, my personal thought is that there needs to be somebody in the room who can translate these different languages, because I think we're using some of the same words and we don't have the same meanings behind those words. True. And the same interpretations. And I've spoken with Dr. Moore about this. I feel like there's somebody else who needs to be in the room, and I'm not sure who that person is, and I'm not sure that it's necessarily one of the five of us. It needs to be a neutral person, I believe, who is agreed on by both parties, who both parties feel is fair and objective and neutral and can facilitate that dialogue. That's my personal opinion. We can discuss whether or not we think that's viable. In the joint plan, you also mentioned amending the joint plan, that as we move forward. There are a lot of things in the joint plan, and I have a number of things up here. But there are a number of things that suggest actions we might do without really specific measurable outcomes to see that we've achieved them. And that was also in some of Dr. Moxley's work. And I went through yet again and highlighted some of that. And there are things, I'm sorry, I've got about 5 different things open, and I need to make sure I've got the right, I'm looking at the right thing. Excuse me a minute. But for example, in the joint order, there are, I'll just look at one section under strategies for recruitment of African American teachers. And some of the actions here are using existing staff to facilitate recruiting, visiting colleges, universities, and career fairs, continuing to recruit. A lot of that is yes, like we need specific things that are yes or no. Did we accomplish, not only did we take the action, but did we produce a result? For me, I would like to see, if we are going to amend the joint order, that we have results tied to that. Some of that is in the African American Achievement Plan, and I'll get to that in a minute. But we can specifically say, did we produce this? Because things in this report that say, like, having one African-American teacher at every school is insufficient, and we know that. One of the things that I think has also happened here is that we've to some degree collapsed the African-American Achievement Plan and the Joint Order. They're related, but they're not the same. They're not the same, and they don't, and they have, I think, added a level of complexity to this that has made it harder, not easier. It doesn't mean that both things are not equally important and valuable, because I think they are. We need to do the work in the African American Achievement Plan, and we need to resolve the issues in the court order. But they're not necessarily one and the same things, and I think we need to spend some time uncollapsing that.
Yes.
Some of I could not possibly agree with you more when you say that presence is not participation and participation is not always inclusion. And we need to do a better job of that. Inclusion is something significantly different than simply being in the room. And I absolutely hear you on that. If we were to move forward, I don't know how far we'll get in this meeting because I think it's one of the first of a series of meetings. It's not the definitive meeting. But if we were going to have outcomes by the end of this meeting, there's two things that I would look for. One, I would want to schedule for the quarterly meetings and to make sure those happens, because we've clearly fallen down on that over the challenges, putting it mildly, of the last year. And we have fallen down on having those quarterly meetings as we have tried to cope with all of the things that have flown at us in this year of COVID. So I think we need to have that on the calendar, and we need to have it sooner rather than later. I think we need, by the end of this, a set of outcomes, not simply the actions that get there, but the outcomes to which the answer is, did we do it or not? It's a yes or no question. It's not, did we take 97 different steps? It's, did we produce the result, and do we have evidence of that? And the answer is yes or no. It's not complicated. So I would like to see us get to that point. And one of the ways I would like to see us get there is I'd like for us to ask ourselves, collectively as a group, a year from now, when we're sitting here in this room at these tables, what do we want to be able to say that we have accomplished in that year? If we're sitting here a year from now and we're looking back at the past year, what have we done? And to work at it backwards rather than necessarily forwards. That may or may not help us identifying where we want to be, but I think we need clearly some more specificity and clarity, not simply around process, but around the outcomes, and the outcomes we can agree to, and they can be answered yes or no. And we can have very clear, specific, and measurable, either we did it or we didn't. And I think we've really overcomplicated that process in the 97 bazillion pages of reports and data and people and structure. I'd like to see us work to simplifying that, if we could.
Dr. Schiff, you said something that was very important. The joint plan, and Mrs. DeGrester, Dr. Warrior, we were the only three that was in the room. I got conflicted with this, and Judge Graham had us all in there. He says, Mr. Brown, I can't do quotas. He says, but if the Indian River County NAACP and the Indian River County School District sit down and come to a decision and bring it to the court, I'm almost certain we'll approve it. That's not a quota. That's an agreement by the two entities. We was also in there, and we were caught up in this 3-year thing. I'm ready to shut down. I'm in federal courtroom in Miami. Let's walk. Let's get up out of here. And Judge Graham looked at me. He said, Mr. Brown, don't get caught up on one word. The word 3 years. He says, I want you to hear me. He said, if the school district of Indian River County, this contract that they signed with you, don't adhere to it, 3 years is illusionary. It's not going to end until you say that we're in agreement. We can do this. We want to do this. But Dr. Jones said something that's been important to Mashawn, myself, all of us who are doing this work, because we don't get paid, district get paid, is TRUST. If you keep showing me stuff and causing me not to trust you, we're going nowhere fast. And one of the things, our education committee, and we've tried to express it to Dr. Moore, until we start doing public records requests, we were getting poop shoved in our face. We were getting misinformation, disinformation, trickology, you name it. That's what we were being given. So the only way we could find the truth of a matter was public records, because it was gamemanship. And we got tired of the gamesmanship. So we have to validate anything that is being told to us with public records requests, because we see over and over the trickology, the misinformation, the disinformation. We've done this, Dr. Schiff, and we're tired. Dr. Warrior, Ms. Pender, Ms. Natalie Sanders, Michonne, Claudia, they work diligently on this. They're not ego tripping. They care. They are serious about these children and doing what's right, but they get like it's back and forth and tit for tat. I got 53 years of my children suffering these atrocities. I'm supposed to go along to get along? I'm supposed to pretend that I feel good? When I see African-American males on the street corners with nowhere to go, but I have a conversation with them and they're smart. And they need somebody to understand and let them know they care about them other than a football game, a basketball game, or a track team. And Dr. She told you my job was to make sure the children got the tutoring. If Johnny can learn the football playbook, Johnny can learn geometry. I'm the nerd that played football. To show you, I played second chair concert trombone in the 8th grade before I played football. I was a nerd. But if he can learn a football playbook, he can learn geometry. And it's incumbent upon us to set the table. I was talking with you, Dr. Schiff, about with Dr. Jones. Equal and equitable. They sound alike, but they're two different horses. We bring something to the table. Our experience. We know what is wrong with this system. We know what can be done to help make it better. Michonne is a young woman who is giving up her time to make a difference. Ms. Pender is a former educator. Dr. Warrior is adamant about making a difference. That lady and I travel up and down the highways on our dime to do this, and now here we are, going on our 3rd year, and we frustrated because we are not seeing that we are being heard. I'm not angry, I'm hurt. Because if you read this book, I was 14 years old. I'm 67. I ain't telling you about what I heard. I'm telling you about what I lived. And believe it or not, it's just more sophisticated now than it was then. The game is the same, the players didn't change, and the way the game is being played didn't change. So I want this to work. I told Dr. Moore, I said, Dr. Moore, Michonne and I, Dr. Warrior, we want this to work. We want you to succeed, but it's got to be done the right way. And I'm not going to change. I'm going to be adamant that you do what is right by my children, which will benefit all children. And we can do this if we do the trust factor. The biggest thing missing, trust and respect, in my opinion.
Mr. Jones, and then I'll get to Ms. Green, but there's been a lot of books written on dysfunctional organizations, dysfunctional teams, and the number one cause of dysfunction is lack of trust.
Yes.
There's 4 or 5 other key things, but it all starts with trust. Think of the military. Can you imagine that if you're in combat and your first lieutenant tells you to go left or right, and you don't trust that guy, you're going to be dead because you're going to go the wrong way. When he tells you to go left, he means go left, not stop and think about it. So trust is critical. Ms. Green, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so one thing, when you mentioned trust, a big issue was there were things that were presented at board meetings to be a success in the district. And then we would have Claudia do a public records request for documentations to support that. And she would either get a no record or information that was not sufficient, or she would get a bill. You know, and that's something that Mr. Brown had mentioned to me, just if data is supposed to have been, work has supposed to have been done in supporting of the plan, then why, when the public asks for that documentation, there's a charge for it? If this work has been done, then that information should be readily available. The second thing, Dr. Schiff, when you said about measurable goals, I think the board, maybe not the entire board, but the people who speak and say that there aren't any for the most part have not looked at probably like the PowerPoints and what Dr. Moxley mocked up, because from those recommendations, our equity committee created an equity report card that we were going to use to go through the data presented, and that's how we were going to determine if different areas have been met. So, I mean, there could still be work in that area. I'm not going to say that it is exhaustive and it is complete, but it does give more set goals for the joint plan. So we went from one teacher per school to it representing the student population. So that changed, and that those recommendations basically superseded the joint plan. So maybe something that we could do in the future is to update the joint plan based off what you all have already approved, and then it's not starting from scratch. If you were to discuss editing, you could just start from that document there with 2019 recommendations going forward. And then the last thing, just to agree with you with the yes or no portion, maybe we could also share the equity report card for you all to look at as well, which is just simplified of the recommendations. We just put it all together with the joint plan requirements and the recommendations that the last board approved.
Mrs. Ehrenberg, your turn.
So you asked about looking at all that data. It's hard because data can be skewed, and data, depending on what somebody wants and whether or not it's really going to hit the target, you can look at all kinds of data, but whether or not it's really going to be the data that you want to interpret the correct way for what the plan says, it can be ambiguous, because you look at it and you say, okay, well, I think this data fits that, and then somebody else's interpretation is no, this data fits that. So it can be very interesting when you look at data and who pulls it and why they pull it and what's being pulled. So all this paper I have on my desk is because I keep a file because I think history is important. And, you know, I have the 2016-17 plan. Quite interesting to go back and read this because we've come a long way since this. Then I looked at the plan that came in when I was here, and we came across the African American Achievement Plan that was developed and updated. I will say this is an update of October of 2019. Okay, so that was last October. And that's the one I think you kept referring to with Dr. Moxley? Okay, so I looked at this one, and this one still, to me, needed room for improvement.
Well, what I'm referring to with Dr. Moxley is the presentation that the equity committee gave with recommendations.
Right, right. And so when you look at this, you say, okay, we made some progress from this one, but we're not where we need to be. So I get your frustration on that. I'm frustrated as a board member too, because I'm thinking, I'm looking at, I don't know about the 53 years, but I'm looking at since I've lived here. And I think, and that's been 30 some years. And I will say that you now, I think, have a board that is very willing to work on this and do what's right by kids. Not that we didn't have a board before that was willing and able, but I think times are different, and you have a board that's listening. But like you said, with difference between listening and being heard, I think I can't speak for my fellow board members, but it's frustrating too to think, okay, we're making some progress, we're going in the right direction, people are starting to come to the middle, and then all of a sudden, no, we're not. And it is frustrating because, you know, I don't know what else as a board member we can do to make that happen other than ask what can we do to make that happen? Because we had an equity committee, and the equity committee hasn't been meeting, correct? And then we have this document, which I always go back to, which is the actual joint plan documentation that came down that says, and I started, the school board may delegate to the equity committee the responsibility for preparing and submitting to the court by the second Monday in December of each year a report regarding the status of the school district's progress in achieving full unitary status.
See, and that's where it goes wrong, because instead of delegating to the equity committee, you all choose to keep it and the two entities do the reporting. And so then the two entities do not agree, and we're here. But if the equity committee were to do the reporting, I think it would be different, because it would be more objective and just based off what they've seen.
Right, and in that same paragraph, if the, like, what I'm saying is the equity committee hasn't been meeting. So in that same paragraph afterwards, it says, alternatively, the school board may elect to retain the responsibility for preparing a report in collaboration with the Indian River NAACP for submission to the court by the second Monday in December of each year regarding the status. Well, because of COVID, whatever else we want to say is our excuse, that hasn't been able to be met. Here we go again. So what can we do? Because I agree with you, Mrs. Rosario, on all of us meeting. We agreed to quarterly. Let's set those 4 meetings up. Let's know when they're going to be. Let's set an agenda that everybody agrees to, kind of like how we do our agendas. I don't know if you know how we do our agendas, but basically it's the superintendent's agenda until it goes over to the chairman, okay? When it goes over to the chairman, anybody, that first part of the meeting, any of us have the right to put something on that agenda, okay? And when it goes on the agenda, then we agree at the beginning of the meeting, yes, that's going to go, and it's going to go into action, or it's going to go to wherever. So, you know, I think that if there's something pertinent that you feel needs to be on an agenda that hasn't been on there, then you have the right to put that on there. You know, just like we have the right to put that on there. Do you think that's fair?
And that's what I was saying. Let's define the rules, define the game.
Right.
And you're bringing some stuff to the table, because we have to, you say, how do we do? Each of us, the 5 of you, and me and my executive committee, we have to sit down and make hard decisions. We got to take our feelings, our prerequisites, our silos, our whatever, and say, wait a minute, what's right and what's wrong? A friend of mine, and I always preface, who happens to be white, asked me a question. He said, Tony, with all the stuff going on, how can I make a difference? I say, when you're in the room and that black joke is told, shut it down. When you're in the room and something negative is said about immigrants, shut it down. He came back to me and he said, man, it works. I say, you don't have to do the money. You have to stand on faith and stand up for what's right, and not get caught up in the politics. But wait a minute. For 53 years, as Terry Berenberg, a board member, for 53 years, we have not done what we agreed to do. We have to look in the mirror and accept that fact. We cannot tell Mr. Brown, be patient. We can tell Mr. Brown, help us get there. Show us some ways to move it faster. Because every day that we don't get there, Dr. Andrew Spar said, it's a fallacy by 3rd grade we should see a kid not reading at 3rd grade at level, it becomes a problem. Mrs. Berenberg, it's a problem in kindergarten. We have missed the boat if we waited to 3rd grade, because he's at a point where he's going to continuously go behind. So we have to make these decisions. We have to be honest with these decisions. We have to be open to the other person's perspective, because we have lived that life. We see it. I told Dr. Moore, and I think I may have told some of you, I used the analogy of the tortoise and the giraffe. The tortoise sees, the giraffe sees the pristine, clean, nice overview. The tortoise sees the nasty, corrupt underbelly. We have been regulated in a lot of ways to the underbelly, to the tortoise. because we see the worst and we are confronted with the worst, and we are constantly fighting to move forward. But if we do this and do it right, and everybody agree, I don't want you to give me nothing, just give me what is rightfully mine, and so that our kids can be productive in this society. But you're right, we have to make some hard decisions.
Mrs. Rosario?
How many, Dr. Moore, how many points are on, points, objectives, goals are on our, I don't know if you know this offhand, on our African American Achievement Plan? And/or pages?
There's action steps, and there's a number of different action steps depending upon the area. So, yeah, an overall number, no, I don't have that.
More than 50?
Oh, yeah.
There are
100?
there are 90 action steps,
90.
4 major goals, 90 action steps.
Okay. So, as a former school administrator, I've done quite a bit of research on turnaround schools. When you have a school that is failing, oftentimes, historically, on average, it takes about 5 years to see a turnaround. That's new administration, new goals, new objectives, new school improvement plan, oftentimes new staff. Oftentimes, it's just starting over at the beginning with creating a new vision and a new mission statement and so on and so forth. And then to see the change, it could take anywhere from 4 to 5 years, sometimes a little bit longer. I am in no way hoping that it takes us that long to get where we need to go. But I think my point is that it's long overdue that there needed to be change in this area. But I can only talk about my part since the moment that I became a school board member, because I was not a part of any of this beforehand. I can only address my responsibility since being a school board member. And my responsibility since being a school board member was to make change. Last year, I think Dr. Schiff just said, where were we a year ago? Where do we want to be in a year from now? It made me think about where we were a year ago. And a year ago, when we met, we goaled that we would establish an equity committee. We goaled that we would establish an African American Achievement Plan. We goaled that we would establish an equity department and an equity coordinator. I believe there were a couple of others in there. Those are the 3 big ones that I can think of right now. And we've met those goals. How we've met them, are they, like I mentioned before, are they a work in progress still? Yes. But we have met those goals. So looking back, I think that we are not obviously where we were a year ago. So I'm grateful for that, and I am grateful for the work that you all have done. I'm grateful for the work that the Equity Committee has worked on your behalf and on our behalf, on all of our behalf. The Equity Committee is, by definition, supposed to do the work as an advisory committee to the board. And in that advisory capacity, just like you just mentioned a suggestion a little while ago about the equity report card, those are the kinds of feedback that we need from the Equity Committee and the work that you all do in our meetings when we meet. If it's quarterly, I don't know if we established last year how often. I know that we said often.
Quarterly.
But if it's supposed to be quarterly, then let's make it quarterly then. So in those quarterly meetings, because the Equity Committee meets quarterly, I believe, and so when the equity committee meets, then of course they would meet with us subsequent to that and give us feedback, give us where they are, and we have these regular ongoing meetings. So I just wanted to also say that I think that's a great idea. I love the idea of the equity report card. I just don't know if right now, because we did not have an African American Achievement Plan as detailed as the one that we have currently, I don't know if I want to consider adding more onto that, because we got to think about the people who are actually putting that in action, you know, to make it work. Our school building principals, if you have goals that are way too broad, we might miss the target. We need to narrow down the focus or narrow the goals a little bit, taper them a little bit more so that we don't miss anything along the way, so that it is workable and we can hold people accountable to reaching those goals. Where do we go from here? Where do we go from here? How do we end this meeting, Mr. Brown? How would you want us to end this meeting? I'm not suggesting that we are ending it right this second, leaving that up to our chair. But what could we do other than committing that our work, other than committing to you our dedication to this, other than committing to you, and Mr. Brown, you have to know, when Dr. Moore and I meet, and we meet about this, there's no rubber stamping. Dr. Moore does not present this picture of everything being, you know, roses and peaches and, you know, and everything is working perfectly. And then there's a rubber stamp on it, great, let's move on. There is dialogue. There is great dialogue that goes on. We do not have it collectively on a regular basis with all board members, but we have it on a regular basis. So I don't want you to think at all that Dr. Moore is just, you know, working as a singular, you know, entity in this, and then, you know, asking everybody to do the work on a daily basis without having accountability to the school board members. I want to believe that he's doing the same thing with other board members that he does with me. But when we meet on these items, there is accountability there. So the work, there is communication here, but I think our next step needs to broaden our communication collectively. So I ask you again, sir,
Well, to
what
answer
could we
you,
do? How would you like to end?
it's a two-part. First and foremost, you brought up something that shows some stuff. You said the people work and what they're doing, and we don't want to add to it, to the AA plan, AAA plan.
No, I said I.
Right. I'm saying, and I think Mr. Grester will validate what I'm about to say. We're sitting in Miami in the courtroom, in the chambers. And Mr. Barkowski said, well, according to the DSEG order, minus 9%, that there could be some schools in Indian River County that don't have a black teacher. I said, Judge Graham, can I say something? He said, yeah, Mr. Brown, go ahead. I said, Mr. Barkowski, if your child was in a predominantly black school, the only white kid there, would you be happy with him from 1st to 5th grade to never see another white teacher? His response, I'm just doing my job. Mine was, I'm just doing mine. So when you have had 53 years of atrocities perpetrated against a group of people, that's irrelevant to me. Who has to work? They're getting a paycheck. Just being as bold as I can, they are being paid to educate our children. Now, how we do this to move forward? The 5 of you take responsibility that the desegregation order is between us. when the sun sets, we are responsible for whether it wins or loses. Not Dr. Moore. Since I've been here, I bet you I've been through 16, 17, 18 superintendents. I asked Dr. Moore in one of the so-called public forums, Mr. Godfrey Gibson asked a question. He said, what is the longevity of a superintendent? They come and go. But the board is here. As Mrs. DeGrasse can attest to, Judge Graham asked, he said, he held up the elements of the desegregation order. He said, I don't care what you say, this is a contract and you have not lived up to it. And Burkowski, he said, I didn't say you as this board, but a board in 1967 agreed to do this and you've not done it. It's the same here today. You all, along with us, and to be blessed with an equity committee with leadership, and I'll say it in her face, behind her back, with the leadership that Mrs. Green has shown, to be open, analytical, unbiased, to do what is right, we were blessed, and we have not taken advantage of it. We're burning her up because God is not going to keep blessing us with these kind of people to help us get to where we're going. To just bluntly answer your question, ownership, responsibility, being aware, talking. The only time I can talk to the board is on 3 minutes on citizens' input. Ladies and gentlemen, and I have to give Mrs. Dr. Schiff and Dr. Moore credit. One of the most hurtful times in my life was the night that I knew that I was supposed to speak to the board and sat for 4 hours, had had major eye surgery the day before, came back the next day and was refused as the president of the Indian River County NAACP, who's in a lawsuit, was refused the opportunity to speak. I'm not a vindictive person, but that hurt.
Refused an opportunity to speak at a board meeting?
You were there, Ms. Rosario.
It was during citizen input over.
Dr. Schiff asked for him to speak.
Okay.
I questioned why aren't we time stamping because I know that you were here earlier the first day and you didn't get your name pulled.
I stayed here for
I
4
recall
hours.
it now. I recall it now.
4 hours I sat here. Does that imply collaboration? Ms. Barenberg, Dr. Schiff, you made good points. I think Ms. Barenberg, both of you said that it's beyond citizen input with Mr. Brown. But if I'm disrespected to that point, and as I said earlier, the board felt, my executive committee felt, that we were being totally disrespected. And if that didn't exemplify it, that day, wait a minute, the president of the Indian River County branch of the NAACP, who is in the midst of a desegregation order with the school district, was refused the opportunity to speak. That was deep. So you, as a board, have to take ownership. It's not Dr. Moore. It's you saying, this is what we want you to do in reference to this DSEG order, this joint plan. Let's lock and load, and let's make it work.
Mr. Brown, thank you for answering that as candid as you did. I apologize for that night. You should have been granted the opportunity to speak. That's just it. You should have been granted the opportunity. With that said, you have my commitment. You have my dedication. You had it a year ago. You had it when I swore an oath to serve this county as school board member. And you all will continue to have my complete dedication in my role in this, in ending this and meeting our goal to reach unitary status. I will do whatever I can do on my part as a school board member and collectively Hopefully the board members, I am sure, feel the same way. With that said, though, I have to say that we have to work with the school. We have to work with the school superintendent. We have to work with him because he is the one on a daily basis that has to make it work. He has to put a plan into action to reach the goals that we are expecting him to reach. So we have to work with him because we're not doing the work on a daily basis. But with that said, you do have my dedication, 100%.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, before I know there's some of my colleagues want to speak, but any of your colleagues, they've been awfully quiet and,
Well,
been-
they not robots, you know, like I said, we had a deep discussion
well, I would
last
like
night.
to offer the opportunity for
Oh, I'm not a dictator, Mr. Barefoot. You have those on Zoom, they know believe me, I got about 11 women that, they don't
Yeah,
bite
you're-
their tongues with me.
You're going to hear about it tomorrow.
No,
I'm just
sir.
giving,
See,
I'm
we
giving you a
do-
chance now. I'm giving
No,
you a
Mr.
chance.
One thing I'm saying, Dr. Warrior, all of them on standby, they are aware. I'm not a dictator. I work with them. I'm just the one that catches all the problems. I'm the gauntlet. But I work with them, their opinions, with Dr. Warrior, Dr. Jackson, all those other people, Mrs. Pender, I'd be lost without them. And see, I'm not too ego-tripping that I can't admit that. Ms. Sanders, they have given of themselves to help me.
I get it. I'm sure. You used to be 6'7", and now you're,
They said Dr. Warrior can't
Log
log
back
on.
onto team, yeah.
She's on team, and she can't log
Huh?
back on.
Dr. Warrior was on.
Off a long time.
Yeah, 20 minutes, her text said, 20 minutes ago, she said she's not able to get back on.
Do we have somebody working on that?
Is she back on?
Oh, I wish she had
I think Marshawn had her hand up.
texted me
Yeah.
20 minutes ago.
And you can see, Mashawn spoke up, you know, that's
Well, I'm
my
just offering
secretary.
out, yes, sir.
I would just like to say, we had our conference last night, and we have appointed President Brown and Ms. Green to be our spokespeople for us tonight. So therefore, they are working for the committee and the Indian River County branch of the NAACP. So that's all, as record. That's why they speaking up for us tonight.
I'm sure Mr. Brown's not a dictator, so, but I was just.
We
double-
don't allow that in our
I
organization.
was just double checking. I didn't want, you never know.
No,
I know.
he works for the community, not himself.
Ms. Green, go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to go back to the comprehensiveness of the African American Achievement Plan, like you all have touched on it a number of times, and just state that even if you were to remove the action steps, the goals would be the same, and they would still be doing that same work, basically. The action steps is just to make it clear to his staff how to reach that goal, and then also to show what documentation the equity committee could look at to see that these steps are being taken. And until there is apparent progress with these goals, the equity committee is going to need something to measure them by. So that's why they have the library of completion or so just to clarify that I don't know, so maybe, because I know you guys kept talking about like how comprehensive it is, how much it is, even if they were to simplify it, it's still going to be happening behind the scenes. It's just to be clear so that not only staff knows, but the equity committee also sees like, okay, we don't see any African-American history being taught in class, but we can go look at the action step and know that we can look at this document and see that they've already did a schedule for it, so we know that it's coming even though it hasn't rolled out. So that's basically what that is for.
Well, I know in conversations with Mrs. Wall that one of the frustrations is that the statements are made, but the documentation backing them up is not available, which is why the public records request. So I think we need to figure out a process where accompanying a report is the documentation validating or verifying that whatever, and by the way, if it's a specific outcome we're looking for and you can't get to it for some reason, explain it. There's a narrative associated with each of these action steps.
Yes.
So I think we can deal with that. Dr. Jones had her hand up first, and then you, Mrs. Schiff.
Thank you. So if we decide to move forward, we feel there is trust. This is what I'm just thinking is how it would happen. Mr. Brown and Mr. Barefoot would collaboratively set the agenda, see what we're going to do. We'd have to be very specific on our goal for that night because, as you know, I know this is our first time where we're just talking,
Right.
but run about 1,000 meetings in my life. You've got to be specific there. Obviously, the Equity Committee reports on where we are and where we need to go with the report card. And then, I know this is another situation I might talk to Ms. DeGrest about, make sure that we give the status to the court when we have to go there. And as I said before, and I know Dr. Schiff commented on this, is that you really need a good facilitator because you can talk a lot through these things. We want to set an objective and finish it. One thing that I really noticed in closing on our 2018 joint plan, it says listing the Indian River NAACP as a community partner on the school district's website. I may have missed that. I don't know if it's there, but even if it is there and you didn't feel like a community partner, then we've got some more work to do. But I just think that really kind of says it all if we have the NAACP as a community partner, because everyone in this room wants every child to succeed. We want every child to succeed. And that's how they move forward to their next journey in life. So I want to get to that point where there's not only is it written on paper, but they are a community partner to the school district. Thank you.
Dr. Schiff, I think
Yeah.
you were next.
Mr. Brown, you mentioned something that this is not an excuse, it's a fact, but is different from for your team and for ours, is that you guys can actually sit down and meet and talk to each other and hash things out. And we can't do that except in rooms like this. So what makes it, again, I don't want this heard as an excuse, but what I personally find frustrating is that, like, I can't call Mrs. Barenberg and Borg. I can't believe I just did that. Right, 2 years.
I know.
But I can't call her or Mrs. Rosario and say, hey, what do you think moving forward? How should we approach X, Y, or Z? We can only have those conversations in rooms like this. And it makes them different. You know, I won't put a judgment on that, but they're different than rooms where we can sit together and hash it out and really brainstorm and think things through. That's not an excuse. It's just something that's difficult about our work together that's unique to the board or to public office here. What I hear us in this meeting, I hear us agreeing to setting regular quarterly meetings. I hear us agreeing to review the joint plan. Are there other things that you would like to hear us say so that when we conclude this meeting, you feel like we have a plan of action that feels satisfying, feels inclusive, and feels like we've made progress here in some way that begins to establish that trust?
Well, I wouldn't say review the plan. We've said from day one, tweak.
Okay.
But we first have to do an analysis of where we were, where we started, what has worked, what hasn't worked. Mrs. Green and the Equity Committee have done some awesome foundational work, preparing us to move forward. But what we could have done, should have done, ought to have done, or might have done, we now have to analyze that and reference history, as Mrs. Barenberg. I'm a proponent of Frederick Douglass said, a man cannot know his future if he does not know his past. So to us to want to change something, we have to analyze it from its inception to see what moved, what wasn't moving, how can we better make it work, what were some of the flaws. And I think there's nobody better who sat at the table than Ms. Green and my education committee to help you understand what was going astray. So that is something I would do. another thing was, and I think when Judge Graham and us did the equity committee, Mr. Grester can validate, it was gonna be 1 and 1. I said, oh, no, no, 2 and 2, and an independent chair, so that we could have this. And when we put the part in there, it really was intended that the equity committee, because both entities is biased, looking at it from our perspective, unless we in totality that we're gonna do the work and move it forward fairly, that the equity committee would be the one to do the report. If I had one request of tweaking that joint plan, it would be that the equity committee is solely responsible for doing the status report and the yearly report with input from Dr. Moore, the NAACP, and the board. That makes it fair, in my opinion. That makes it even have the appearance of being fair and unbiased. So those are some things in the quarterly meeting, as Ms. Green said. Let's go back. Meeting every now and then, not gonna work. Because I refuse, I don't even come to school board meetings unless it's a major, I watch them on TV, because I don't feel right walking up there with somebody putting a time clock on me as the president of an organization. And not only that, I'm on the executive staff of the state NAACP, so I don't feel good with somebody telling me, oh, you got 3 minutes, click, alarm goes off, sit down. So these are some of the things where that quarterly meeting, I would say, institute the quarterly meeting that Dr. Moxley did. Let's collectively say that the equity committee will be responsible for the status report and the end of year report with collaboration. But they would do it, and then we would sign off on it, the two entities. Those are two major things. And another thing is that not to look at public records requests as a bad thing. Dr. Jones put it out there, ladies and gentlemen, I am sorry, we don't trust the system. I'm being honest. We have a reason not to trust. This is not something I pull out the sky. I often tell Dr. Moore with Miss Peggy Parcell. Miss Peggy is like family to me. I walked around with the keys to that lady's house in my pocket for over a year, where she trusted me to be in her house and she wasn't there. This is what is trust, that we can understand that we're gonna do this and we're gonna do it right and feel that Terry Barrenberg gonna do what's best for children irregardless to what the pressures are. That Mara Schiff gonna do what she does, because I know, I often say, you two gonna look at it. I know Dr. Jones, she gonna dig deeper than deep. And I always say, if you give Ms. Barrenberg, make it about the children and give her the data, you got her, because she's been around. So these are the things, I'm very observant in understanding who we're working with and what's gonna make this process work. Those are little things. So when Ms. Wall, who's a member of the Indian River County NAACP Education Committee, she should not be singled out and attacked for doing what she do. She wants to know so that we can make sound decisions based on, and as you said, Ms. Barrenberg, data is suspect. And it's all in the eyes of the beholder. But if we got the facts that will support that data, it's a whole different conversation. So those, to answer you, Dr. Schiff, those are how I'm, the three of the things that I would, or four of the things that I would want to take away from you, if we are to move collectively. And I think tomorrow, Mrs. Green and the Equity Committee should be able to get us a status report, because I think you've all said it previously. There is no status report because of COVID. And I've been adamant about that. You know, I applauded Dr. Moore for the laptops and the feeding, but it was not relative to the joint plan or the deseg order. Had nothing to do with them. Every school district in the state of Florida was doing it, and in other states. was giving out computers, feeding children, doing all of these things, not relative to the DSEG order. What did we do for the DSEG order, the joint plan? Very little, because of COVID-9. I think I told Dr. Moore, he had 40-some days initially, and when it was time for the status report to be done, the students had been in school another 10 days. I think it was 49 or 59 days that he'd had actual bodies in brick and mortar. So there was no foundation to do no status report.
But we are required by the court to produce a report, correct?
We were doing it, but it was to entail, due to COVID.
No, I
It was going to
understand.
be a report, but it was not going to be relative to something that didn't matter in reference, and Mrs. DeGresta, myself, and Dr. Moore. We know Judge Williams ain't nobody to play with, and you will not insult her.
Well, she's expecting a report by,
She was expecting one by,
well, we've just been advised.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Barefoot. Board members, you may not have had a chance to look at your emails late this afternoon. We did get a communication from Judge Williams, who is the trial judge with regard to the federal desegregation matter, and she is expecting the parties to provide a joint update to her by December 21st with regard to what has occurred between the time of our last report saying that we were going to be going through a mediation process in order to come up with our fourth joint plan to the joint report to the court that was due back in September. And Judge Williams has also asked for the timeline for getting that fourth joint report to the court that was due back in September. So we have to provide an update by December 21st.
That's by the end of this week. That's next Monday.
and that's why I said, tomorrow, I said tomorrow it should be done. And it can be done because it could be one page. It doesn't, I mean, we don't need to give any fluff. As a result of COVID, we attempted to do certain things, but we were unable to. We didn't have kids in brick and mortar. You cannot do an analysis of where you're moving if you don't have children. You can do all the paperwork you wanna, but is it relevant until you can see what effects it has on students? Then you can do measurables, because it's reflected in the student population. But on paper, no.
All right, so between now and the end of the week, Dr. Moore and you or your designee have to agree on something, 1 page, 10 pages, whatever it is, to be submitted to the court, correct?
Can I jump in for a second?
I'm trying to speak.
Yeah,
Just a second.
that's not
We-
quite it.
The judge is requiring an update. The judge wants to know what has occurred between the parties, attempts at scheduling mediation or attempts at further drafting of the report that was due back in September. The judge wants to know what has happened since that September due date and today. The judge also wants to know when we will be providing that fourth joint
Okay.
report. So there's kind of two aspects to it.
They're not
So-
one and the same.
Correct, sir. So it's like a chronology of communications or meetings or attempts to get some things accomplished would be number one. And then number two would be, what is our timeline for actually getting that fourth report into the court?
And it's due January, right, Mr. Gressler?
Pardon me?
December, January, the 4th?
Oh, you're gonna tell the judge when?
The-
when
No,
you-
I was asking.
Judge Williams' order that came out this afternoon says by December 21st, we need to provide that update.
Oh, yeah, I'm
Update,
saying.
but not the final report.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, not the final report.
Yes, we just need to provide our timeline for when that fourth joint report will be submitted to the court that was due back in September.
Right.
So you are correct, sir. It wouldn't have to be on the 21st, but we have to provide a timeline of when we'll get it in.
Mr. Barefoot?
Dr. Moore, did you want to?
I was just going to summarize what I heard and make a recommendation. A update, very straightforward to what Mr. Brown is recommending. This is where we've been because of COVID. This is because of the lack of data. We don't have a real measures to monitor the outcome. And at this meeting, we collectively agreed to what is still in process. I've got to meet quarterly with the board, to collectively adjourn, to create the agenda, whatever else is agreed upon moving forward. And then my recommendation would be to publicly notice for the equity committee to come in and evaluate, using the report card or whatever the metrics is, the implementation of that first year. And then I fully agree, the equity committee should be the author of this is where we were in that particular year. That goes to the court. The status update, I got to be honest, I like that idea too. I don't know if the equity chair likes that idea, but it does improve the opportunity to ensure the entities are working together with the equity committee almost evaluating the implementation of said work.
Can't you create a dashboard? I mean, I'm a big believer in dashboards. And you create the specific things you're addressing, and even if it's in the form of a picture graph, I mean, with some narrative to explain, it would seem to me that would be a good way to sort of track on a regular basis where you are toward, reaching certain goals or objectives, if it's applicable in this case. In some
I would
cases, it
think
probably is, some it
moving
isn't.
forward, there would be opportunities to create dashboards. Dashboards are something that we, over the last year, probably do better than most.
Yeah, I agree.
And that is a live document that drives progress in real time. And then creating that based on these are the specifics that we're working on, I think that would be the work that we would do in January. These are the areas that we're going to work on. These would be the established goals, and this is how we're going to progress monitor.
So before I turn it over to my colleague, one question, Ms. Green. If you're going to be the arbiter in the middle of the two, NAACP and the district, do you have the staff? Or can you? I mean, I somehow I don't think that you're looking at it, or I'm looking at it. So here you are. So it's,
Secretary.
well, you're the CEO, the CFO, the secretary, and what have you.
Janitor.
Researcher, janitor.
And you're the executive assistant to yourself. So it would seem to me that this is something perhaps you and Dr. Moore can work out, that you oversee it, but a lot of the data is going to come from the district that you're going to opine on and tweak and what have you, that we find a way to support your efforts that's subjective and agreed upon by Mr. Brown and his colleagues.
Well, Mr. Barefoot, if you've ever seen any of her PowerPoints, I mean, you don't have to worry. She is all of that. And we're, as an organization, we're confident in her work, who she is, her trustworthiness, I mean, her care, her love for what she's doing, her love for the community. So it's not an issue. It's a done deal, because she's going to incorporate all entities anyway.
That's great.
And the district has been pretty supportive when it comes to like what I need and getting stuff printed out. Brenda
That's the
has been
question.
wonderful, yeah.
Okay, all right. Mrs. Barrenborn.
Thank you. Just to let you know, because we can't meet, like Dr. Schiff said, and talk to each other, our communication's through the superintendent every week. And, we review data all the time on this. So when you asked about this data, I'm asking specifically, you brought up 1.3, I think it was, about African-American history. And, what are we doing with that? And he'll give me some updates of what's coming, what his plan is. And I will say there have been some positive movements that have been happening that I don't know if you're looking at that, because it's not really data you can track so much. But for example, I want to see, okay, I asked when we met before about this, I see an action step. I'd like to know who's responsible for it, and how is it going to get done at the school level? Who's responsible for it there? Obviously, it falls on the principal, but specifically, how is it going to happen in the school so we can verify that it is happening? Because I agree with you. You can say, oh, yeah, a certain percentage is happening, but then when you drill down and you get to the school level, you go, is it really happening in every school? So what I am kind of feeling better about is that he's incorporating the African American plan goals into the school improvement plan. So we're not having all these plans all over the place. We're doing what's best for kids, and it's specifically in the school plans. That's what I want to see as a board member, that we're doing that. And, you know, we can talk about all this data, we can look at all these goals, but is it actually happening at school level? And what proof do we have? So it's encouraging to see those school improvement plans changing like that. And that's been a tweak that I see that I think you really should look at if you haven't already. I heard Mrs. Rosario say, you know, so we can end this, and I wrote it down, you know, end this. I think, you know, we've talked about this. I think that's been the conversation in other times where let's just get done with this. And I will
That's
say
not
that.
what I meant.
I understand that, but you said let's
But
end
that's not
this
what I
like as in the legal part, I'm
Okay.
assuming.
Okay,
That's not what I was referring to. I was referring to the legal part.
thank you.
I think when Dr. Moore and I have conversation about this, he's like, yeah, whatever, about the legal part. He says, this is what's best for kids, and we're going to keep going with this. And I want to keep meeting with the NAACP, and I want to keep having these quarterly meetings to talk about this stuff so that we can do what's best for kids and not just say we did this, but actually make the change that needs to occur. So I do applaud him, and I will say that our conversation, I'm sure he's had it with my colleagues, has been about, no, he really does say, let's do what's best for the kids. Let's not just put this in writing and do it. Let's actually make it happen and continue to happen. And not just say, okay, we're done, check it off on that little check mark, and we're done. No, we'll never be done. We need to keep moving forward, so I applaud you for that part. I think that the data requests, you know, we were talking about when somebody does a request for records, there's actually a procedure for that, and there's a statute for that, and we have to follow all of that. I would like to maybe suggest this. In our January meeting, we determined, because it's here, it's kind of vague, this is the actual joint plan, okay? It says the school board may delegate to the equity committee the responsibility for preparing and submitting to the court, right? And then it says alternatively, we may elect to retain the responsibility for preparing the report in collaboration. I think as a board, we need to determine what we're gonna do. And we need to talk about that in our January meeting and put it as an action item. So I'm asking for that as an action item in January, so that we can determine, are we gonna put this, have the equity committee do this?
Well-
And if so, instead of this or may this, I think we need to discuss this as a board. And then the other part of that is, if the equity committee, like she's saying, is asking for data, you know, you're saying that Mrs. Wall is doing these requests for records, which we see the record requests every week, just so you know. And when you see somebody asking over and over again for tons of information, and that's taking a lot of time from staff where they can't do the job they're supposed to do, you know, you go, okay, how come this is a redundancy of information? I get the trust issue. I get that. So I guess to go around this so that you don't have to do the request for records, maybe if we have this discussion in January about how we're going to have this, the responsibility of performing this unitary status report, maybe to get the data for that, which you've said they've been really good for you to get that data, is that data request comes through the equity committee.
Well,
And
so this is the thing, Mr. Barefoot suggested that when like the point saying, hey, we've accomplished this, if they have the documentation attached, that would eliminate the request for the data.
That's exactly right.
Right.
Right,
Right.
yeah.
So let me just say, what has been prepared to be presented to the equity committee for them to conduct that report is exactly that. With a narrative, that is the 5-inch binders, not trying to influence any one thing, but the volume of work that staff has done is significant. And if we're going to be, you know, completely open and honest, the ownership of the African American Achievement Plan, the ownership of equity really fell upon the back of really one person in this district prior to being here. And the shift in practice over the last year and not by any means am I saying things have been completely successful, but determining equity as a priority and the implementation of the action steps within the African American Achievement Plan have been clearly defined as a priority. So moving the work forward, where we are in terms of awareness or ownership, and I think it was Tony who said ownership, we're in a much better place. And I've said this to Tony and I said this to Marshawn. One of the partial unitary status was something that attracted me to this position, to have the opportunity to have that influence or to have that impact. But man, it is much worse than I thought it was upon my arrival. And I've shared with both Tony and I don't think it was just Tony, fears that I had with my own daughter's friends coming to stay here, to visit, which just fuels me to do the work even harder. So the opportunity to really dig in and do this work, it is a priority. So my recommendation is allow the Equity Committee to look at the work, look at the information that has been provided. That's the documentation. If it's not there, it's not there. And evaluate it as it is to make your life easy, the Equity Committee's life easy, to put together that presentation. And you're right, it is not what I wanted it to be because of COVID this year, because of the implementation. It is hard to say this has been the true impact as a result of all the changes or shifts in practice. I say that up front. And the role of the Equity Committee is to, hey, here is the recommendations, here is the information that was provided, here is the evaluation, NAACP, here is the evaluation, school board. Are you in agreement with this? And then have that dialogue and conversation collectively, and that becomes what would be the annual report that would go. And I can tell you this work is not time-bound. It's not one more year of a plan. There's absolutely no way. My issues, as I've said with Tony, I think, sadly, that you can fully implement the joint plan as it is written. You can do the things that are in the plan and not improve the quality of life for African American children in this district. You can do the things in the plan and not improve academic performance for African American children in this district. That's why I say establishing goals. This is what we're going to accomplish this year. Did we do it or did we not? If we didn't do it, what did we do right? What did we do wrong? And how do we improve it to implement into the next year? And remove a specific set of time. Time, it's going to take a lot more than one more year or 5 more years. There's significant work that needs to be done to have the influence we collectively want to have.
By the way,
If
I
I
want
may
to
just-
welcome
Before
Dr.
Ms.
Warrior
Broussard-
back.
Yeah, because
Finally have Dr. Warrior back amongst us.
Yeah, Mr. Barefoot, before you go there, I wanted to respond to Mrs. Barrenberg. I have to differ. See, it came up where we get words, Dr. Schiff said, our interpretation of wordage. This is the Equity Committee. I have an Education Committee. They're 2 different entities.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
She chairs my Education Committee, but she's also on the Equity Committee. Ms. Saunders is a member of the Education Committee, but she's also on the Equity Committee. They don't interact, those 2. But it was a joke down in Miami when our attorney asked Judge Williams, because we were being accused of violating the Sunshine Law, and she asked them to define it for me. Judge Williams has humor. You know, you heard of Dr. Moore when she. Humor? I liked her. I mean, she wasn't,
humor that day.
it was humorous to me, but anyway,
Yeah.
we have to also have access
Oh, right.
so that we can validate. Mrs. Pender has a job. Mrs. Pender has a life. Mrs. Saunders has responsibilities. She just retired. So we have some other people in the Educational Committee, including Dr. Warrior and Mrs. Wall, who needs to sit behind them and make sure that they cover their backs, because they cannot do this alone. And it may be putting some people who get a paycheck to do a little work. She don't get a paycheck. Natalie Sanders don't get a paycheck. Dr. Jacqueline Warrior don't get a paycheck. Claudia Wall don't get a paycheck. And others don't get a paycheck. They are doing this hard work. Mashawn don't get a penny. I might buy a Coke. But these people are doing this work and they're not receiving any pay. So it is not, I'm not sympathetic to this extra work. If we weren't in this mess, we wouldn't need this extra work. We got to, Mrs. Berenberg, one thing, we in a pit, and we got to dig our way out of it. We got to get in some nasty places, some bad places, some tough places, some uncomfortable places, in order to do what should have been done 53 years ago. We are now the recipients of all of this foolishness. So we cannot look at a box. We got to think outside of the box. I don't agree with Dr. Moore saying it could do this but not do that. I go back. If we collectively sit down and tweak it and agree on the tweaking, we can make it work for anything we want it to work. But I still say that we must have access to records requests and not get caught up, because I'm in a situation, Mrs. Berenberg, I'm not addicted, but I'm not going to trust you just because you tell me to trust you, especially
get
when
it.
there's a history.
I get it. I get it.
So the records request, they let us know if it's real or if it's Memorex. Because sometimes it'd be Memorex. So that is why I don't think that it should be limited. I don't think that it should be stopped. And I don't think it should be compound what the Equity Committee and Mrs. Green has to do with to sit back and decipher and discern all this information when we have people who have volunteered. Two of them have PhDs. One of them got a double PhD. And Ms. Wall that sit back and analyze all of this data in real time.
I had actually asked Claudia to assist me with what documents to request, because she was, like, we were sitting down with the work, and so
Yeah.
then she was requesting them and just CCing me on it.
Yeah, so it's collaboration to do the work and to be sure that we're dotting the i's. And I want you board members to hear me, please, and hear sincerely. I'm trying to erase 53 years of educational atrocities. I'm a victim. I'm one of the victims. I'm the second graduating class under the DSEG order, and we were drugged through hell and sued for damages. So I have some stories to tell along with other kids. We need to right this ship by any means necessary, and we have to get out of our comfort zone and not say, the board needs to say, let's get her done, whatever's necessary. That's my opinion.
One of your colleagues had your hand up.
Yes, I have a couple of things I want to bounce on. Starting with you, Dr. Moore. Your explanation of the time frame for these goals and action steps to be met. My question, as well as my frustration, is this. Those books represent 53 years of things?
Just several months.
Yeah.
Just several months? Okay, that's the frustration that I'm dealing with over here. Is there a time frame? laid out for any of the goals in the desegregation order to be met?
Is there a time frame?
Right.
There is an update that we provide, the equity committee provides to the board on an annual basis.
And that's one time a year?
Mhm.
Okay. And that's what goes to the judge?
Correct.
Okay.
So you were asking him, though, he has a time
For
frame
the
for the
district.
district to meet
Yeah,
those?
because when we come to these meetings, it seems to be redundant as far as the work and the conversations being had. We sat here last year and we did this. And I understand that Ms. Berenborg has several different plans that shows progress. However, the conversation is still the same. Facilities, administration, and et
Support
cetera.
staff, yeah.
And that's where my frustration comes in. I would like to come to one of these meetings and actually be given a document that shows these things have been accomplished. This is what is ongoing. This is what's in the future. Because honestly, I'm sitting here, just being frank, totally confused. Honestly. Complete. I mean, I'm taking notes because that's what I have to do. But when you talk to people in the community and you have to talk to them in layman's terms, especially when you're dealing with words like IEP, equity committee, they don't get this. So when they ask me, well, what are they doing? I'm stuck. I am. And I understand that we have to be collaborative and we have to respect everybody and build trust, but how much more time are we going to spend doing that before we can get to the meat and potatoes and actually help our children?
Well, we've got Mrs. Rosario and Ms. Green, so, and Dr. Schiff.
One of the I appreciate what you're saying, because sometimes in my head, I feel the same way, to be honest with you. We had much of this conversation before. But again, I say that we have made strides. Dr. Moore, I want to come back to the question about who's going to write this report next Monday. For the new board members, last year, we agreed as a board that we would work collaboratively with the NAACP on that report. We actually had, not us, we gave the directive for Mrs. D'Agresta to work with the superintendent and the NAACP to create that report that would go to the courts in December, and subsequent reports have been exactly in that same manner. The superintendent's input in this is important because he knows the day-to-day, what's going on day-to-day, as I've mentioned before, if there are any updates, if there is anything that the equity committee does not know of, because the equity committee meets quarterly, not on a daily basis with regard to what is happening in our schools. So those are the reasons why we, last year, agreed that our attorney would work with the NAACP on that. What I heard earlier from Mr. Brown is that his input in that report was more of an attachment. What I would like to see is that we continue to work, we have to fix what is perceived to be broken. I'd like to see us work together, truly work together collaboratively to mend that trust and create a report where Mr. Brown's input is not an attachment, that it is embedded within the one report with us, so that we have both our superintendents work
ground zero work on what has been done or what has not been done. And even if the Equity Committee Chair would like to be present, I'd love to have her input as well in this, to show their work in it so that we can work together on that. I would like to see one report with everyone's input in it. I'm not sure, I don't know if I'm there yet. To a certain extent, I agree with Mrs. Berenborg in that the board collectively has to discuss what we want to happen moving forward, but we have a report due next Monday. And we don't really have time to really sit here and pander and waste time on anything else but to say, you know, we have this report and it needs to be submitted. Who is going to submit that report accurately? My concern is I want the accurate information in there. Whether nothing has been done, then I want it to accurately reflect nothing has been done and why. If it has been, then I want the superintendent's input in there, and I want the equity committee's input, and I want the NAACP's input in there. Can we do that?
So this is the dilemma that we face. That's what the superintendent is saying the district has done, 998 pages. The report is due Monday, and then a follow-up report is due in January or possibly February. I can tell you, on behalf of my committee, that is not happening
But we
in
did
that
do.
time period. Like,
But
we're-
we did do that, because we did do the we did do the African American Achievement Plan. So
But
from,
that was the first year.
no, the one that was just done this summer.
No, I think that was the African American Achievement Plan. This is the status update. So
I
just
know,
a
but
little.
doesn't the status
let me
update
back up
include
and
that?
go forward. So during the summer briefing on the equity update that I brought to the board quarterly, I asked for direction from the board whether to, and I read from the joint plan, whether to the board's desire to allow the equity committee to create the report or to work collaboratively with the board, or with the equity committee. It was, I was directed to work with the equity committee in the creation of the report. Went back to the equity meeting before we kind of paused pending mediation, and I made the recommendation which creates that information. My desire in creating all that documentation was to make the review simple. And here's the information that was, here's the information within each. Now, is it substantial? Yes. Would it have been that substantial last year? No, because that represents 22 different schools, because it's the issue at 22 different schools. It represents all of the district work. It includes a narrative of where it is. It makes, although it is a lot of work that was done, it does accurately capture that work. It doesn't capture the impact in a number of areas because you don't have a level of accountability. My recommendation would be what is required to the courts now is a simple update, which is relatively straight. My recommendation is it's relatively straightforward. We were pending mediation. We couldn't agree. We now had a meeting, a joint meeting between NAACP and the school board. These were the conditions that were created that now allow us to move forward, and those conditions are created here. That satisfies the court in terms of an update. Now, within that update, I would include a language, in order to fulfill the annual report, the equity committee will be publicly noticed, and they'll have an opportunity to provide feedback on the joint plan. And that joint plan, that feedback comes to the board at a January meeting. This is very similar to last year, in which it's presented in whatever form Tony would want to present it to his team. Fine with me. It presents to the board, you accept it or say, what about this, that, or the other, and then that satisfies the court, and now we're back on it, we're in a good space. Now we're meeting quarterly, we're defining the action that's going to take place, and whatever else was agreed upon here to move the work forward. I'm just trying to summarize what I heard.
I'm good with that.
There may need to be pertaining to the time frame, even with the years, because as far as this equity committee goes, our time is up.
Right.
There will be an appointment of a whole new committee. So I don't know if you all would request that in the status reporting.
And my recommendation is in that status update that the current equity would complete that work in January, and then we have to go through, as dictated by the joint plan, the next election and appointment process, where I would have to make a recommendation to the board. These are the individuals who will serve the annual appointment on behalf of the school board, and whatever process Mr. Brown uses and the team uses, those 4 individuals come together at what would be their first meeting, also in January, towards the end of January, which is the same time frame we had last year, and elects the chair.
But is that enough time for the current equity committee to accurately review the work to submit an annual report? Because what I'm leaning to is just COVID.
Yeah.
Because we only have, what, a few weeks, and with us publicly noticing, Ms. Pender and Ms. Saunders already told me before we stopped that I was calling too many meetings for them
Well,
to attend, so.
Could we not go through, with what we do because of COVID? You know, you look in baseball records and all of that, and there's an asterisk by certain things. I think, as Judge Graham said, and Mr. Grester, you were there, if we come to a decision collectively and bring it to her, there's the possibility that she'll sign off to extend the term because of COVID of the existing equity committee, if, you know, if that's feasible. I'm not sure, but COVID has brought about a lot of different stuff, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, and it makes sense because the FSA scores did not happen.
Right.
And then the discipline numbers were skewed because kids were sent home. You know, so it's not accurate data to even for us to really compare to years before, because it would look like progress, but it's not because kids were not in class.
They should have been. Virtual is still class, but I.
Yeah, but the
Not brick
disciplinary
and
things.
mortar, yeah.
Yeah.
it's suspended when you're
The
not.
discipline is
So-
different over the internet.
Yes,
In the
I
interest
know.
of moving this along, could we, and this is, because the equity committee might change, the chairmanship of the equity committee might change, I hope it doesn't personally, but, you know.
It likely will.
But, right, I know that it might. In order to be clear about the outcomes of this meeting, could we, Dr. Moore, could you produce a list of what we've agreed to tonight that could be circulated tomorrow to the board and the NAACP so that we're all clear that we've agreed to the same things tonight? We maybe don't have that list tonight. And if we need to recapture some of those things, we could do that. But so that we're clear by tomorrow that we're all on the same page, that we've agreed to the same things. We agreed to quarterly meetings. We agreed to, I don't have them all. You had some. We agreed to quarterly meetings. We agreed to tweaking the joint plan. We need to create a structure for doing that. We agreed that the equity committee is going to produce, I think, the update to the court, which is basically going to say, we've met, we've agreed to move forward, we are rescinding, I think, our desire to go to mediation. We've made progress. That's simple enough for the report now. We're going to ask for some agreement on withholding the final report because COVID has made it so that we don't have some of the data that we need. Am I right so far? And we're going to set dates for quarterly meetings. I think we need some agreement about that because we don't really want to wait till the end of the first quarter, which will be March. I think we all want to meet before that.
Could you all set your first date tonight?
Yes.
Yeah,
That's
we could
fine,
set a
but-
first date.
That's fine with us, but wouldn't the equity committee want to set your dates first, or do you want to meet with us first?
We just want to make sure that the NAACP and the school board set their date. So if you all,
So first question, do we want to have the first quarter's meeting in January? Or do we want to wait until further? The first quarter goes from January to March. At what point during that do we want to meet?
you may want to have it in January if you're doing your annual, because you still have to have your annual meeting to discuss, right? Discuss the equity.
So we're going to have our first quarterly meeting in January. We'll follow up quarterly, so the next one will be in April, et cetera, which will land us in time to produce the final annual report to the court by next December. That should actually work really well.
And then because we're submitting something on the 21st to say when the year report will be in, what date are you wanting to submit to the judge for that?
So here's the other question. If the equity committee is going to, I personally am not clear on what we've agreed to with that, because I remember our past conversations differently. I remember that Ms. DeGresta and Dr. Moore were going to work on it, but I remember specifically saying I wanted the board to have input into that. So we need to have some very clear agreements about when that report is going to happen, by when, if the equity committee is going to do that, by when a draft will be produced so that we can all look at it, so that so that we're not scrambling at the last minute. So we need to have some really clear deadlines on that.
Mr.
That may be you, that may not be you. I'm not clear about that, because you may be the outgoing chair, but you are the one who was responsible for the work for the last couple of years.
So December 21st, you have to tell the court, though, what date.
Correct.
So,
So if the equity committee is producing that report, which I think is what I just heard, or you're at least producing a first draft of it, by when do you think you can do that so that it can then come to the board and the district?
When is our second
This is the-
January board meeting?
So we do it a week before that?
so that's the final.
Okay. The review,
produce
the report, the support that we'd have. So let me just kind of go back. My recommendation would be, because I think in doing this work for coming back to a workshop in January, which is my workshop, so we can use that space to have that meeting to review the presentation from the equity committee and allow them the first 3 weeks in January to meet, review the plan, put together the report, very similar to the report that was put together last school year in December. Once that's done, then that would be brought to the board and then sent to the court. And that would be the notification that we would give to, that would be the report, that would be the information that we give to the judge by Friday, this Friday.
Dates, you mean?
So
My recommendations for the quarterly meetings would be March, because in March, a report is due to the court. So pulling us together, aligned to when information has to go to the court, just naturally works. So March, June, and then again in September, another report is due in September, and then again in
Before each
December. So
report.
you're having your meetings every single time
Before.
something is due to the state, and
makes
there's no, it just eliminates some of the confusion. You could also align the equity meetings to that same schedule, if that is the will of that committee. Do that work, comes jointly together, information. It just creates a flow of communication, would eliminate some of the lack of conversation.
So to be clear, what I hear you saying is, we'll come together by the fourth Tuesday. Your superintendent's workshop would be the fourth Tuesday in January, correct? Because we agreed we were going to have board discussions on the second Tuesday and the superintendent workshop on the fourth Tuesday.
Yes.
So the December 21st report to the court will say that a draft will be produced by whatever is the date of the fourth Tuesday in January. And then, 2 weeks after that, we'll have a final report submitted to the court.
So, okay, so what if we say that due to COVID, we don't have a final report? Because when I was discussing this report with Dr. Moore, I saw Ms. Pender's face and Ms. Sanders, and I'm thinking, the accuracy of the final report is not going to be accurate by January the 26th. So I just don't see us creating something that,
So if that's true, I think we have to ask the court that rather than tell them that we're not going to produce a
Right.
report, we ask them, given the circumstances of the year, if it is acceptable to forego this year's annual report because everything ceased as a result of COVID, unless there are indicators that we think we could reasonably provide.
Mrs. Schiff, I think,
Dr. Schiff?
excuse me. Mrs. DeAgresta, I think, has some insights here instead of just going back and forth.
Thank you, Mr. Barefoot. Board members, the joint plan requires that we provide every 6 months an update to the court. If we're having a problem, if we're not having a problem, how we're doing in that prior 6-month look back on implementing the plan. So the September 6-month report didn't get submitted. So the court is looking for that report, whatever information can be provided as far as that 6-month look back. In addition to that, there's a requirement that you've just been discussing, that the Equity Committee review and provide an annual feedback on implementation of the joint plan. And there is some sort of documentation report, PowerPoint, however the Equity Committee documents it, and that information is then shared with the school board, with the NAACP, and an annual report is submitted to the court. So every year, we are looking at 2 snapshot report updates and then 1 final, how did we do and what are we doing the next year going forward. So we don't want to lose sight of, we need to provide information about that report that was due in September, and then also if we, for that annual report, some update and timeline, if we're not going to do it, if we are going to do it, something back to the court. I'm not suggesting the court's going to say, fine. The judge entered an order saying you will provide a report. So we can certainly say we won't this year, and the answer back may be, yes, you will this year. So
Right. So maybe what we do, rather than request not to submit a report, is we submit a report that basically says, we know our data is limited, we know our data is skewed, this is the data we have, this is the data we don't have, and this is the best we can do for this year, given that much of the data required by the report is unavailable because kids weren't in school.
but who has time
But-
to do that in a month? Like, that's the point.
That's why we
in a
have a
month, we
lawyer.
don't. So what we're saying is, based off COVID, the parties have agreed that we do not have enough data to submit an annual report. We ask that you grant us, for this one time, just relieve us of this reporting this one time due to COVID, the data, and just discuss that FSA testing did not happen. Students went remote, so a lot of the data will be skewed, and it will not be an accurate representation of what is happening in our district. So, I feel like she would be okay with it just because the 2 parties are agreeing, because that's when Judge Williams had an issue, it was the fact that one party felt they weren't being heard, another party submitted something that the other party did not agree with. But if both parties are saying, we collectively agree that due to COVID, we really don't have any accurate data to report on at this time, and we ask you to just relieve us of this responsibility at this time.
What I heard
Mrs.
Ms. DeGresta saying is there's 2 reports. We then have to request it for the report that was due in September.
No, we're going to submit that first status report. In that first status report, we're going to request that the second
Got it.
annual report not have to be
Got it. So we're gonna-
submitted. And if she says, I'm sorry, we need a report, then we just regroup. And you guys will be meeting in January anyway. You can discuss it then.
And she also said, Ms. DeGresta, that if we had problems, just let her know.
And if you needed more time, just let her know. Yeah.
So
Yes,
she's,
sir.
and it goes back to Mrs. Green, and it goes back to Judge Graham, all through the process. And I keep trying to reiterate that. If the 2 parties sit down and collectively agree with something and bring it to the court, this is one of those instances where we are not disrespecting her. It's a reality that COVID threw all of us out. And this may make us shout that for once, the two of them agreed. I mean, I'm being serious. I was in that courtroom. And this is what she wants, for us to finally get our feelings out of the way and do what's right. If we can go to her one time saying, we collectively agree on something that as a result of COVID, Judge, we can give you a report, but it's going to be skewed. It's not going to reflect anything that's relevant. And just collectively do that report and both parties sign off on it. It's worth the try.
Dr. Warrior has her hand up.
We could agree.
All right,
May I
have
say
we,
Dr. Warrior has her
Dr.
hand up.
Warrior.
Dr. Warrior's trying to get in.
I think there's sort of two different things you're discussing. The data won't be skewed, and that's one of the things I've been concerned about. We cannot just toss out the data because of COVID, because there's actually some very good information that we have, you know, the impact of different instructional models and things on kids that can be collected. We have some iReady scores. We just express what is missing, because what we end up doing then is otherwise cutting big holes in the fabric of information and data, and that make what we will report for the COVID year will look to an extent different. Remember, we did 3/4 of that year. We did 3 quarters. And there was, you know, the end quarter we did not do. And there was another whole set of impact that came along. So that's part of it. I think we just can't not collect useful and valuable information moving forward. Now, the issue is different in terms of whether it gives the equity committee the time to do whatever it needs to do. Those are sort of two different things.
She's right. Just give
So,
them
so then
something.
you communicate that,
Yeah.
that due to COVID, you did not have enough time to evaluate the data? Like, then what's?
Well, it depends on which parts of the data that you're talking about. You know, there are no FSA scores, but there are, you know, other scores, and the testing, you know, of that was being done by the district. There was discipline issues for disciplinary numbers for the first 3 quarters of the year. What will be missing is the 4th quarter. We just have the data reflect accurately what was done and what was missing, or else we stand the risk of 10 years down the road or 5 years down the road looking back and just seeing a hole here that we're really not quite sure what happened in it other than COVID.
So I think and Dr. Warrior is spot on
Yeah.
as usual. In some cases, in areas, there is no reliable data. Suspensions, academic outcomes, and that holds true because this is a annual report. So the end of last year, data is skewed. The beginning of this year, because kids weren't in school, data is skewed. There are other areas of the plan, recruitment, retention, in which we can report on.
I agree. That's why Dr. Warrior get the big bucks. She's right on, and I think it would be a summary of, but going on to the next phase, that would be more intense.
And I'm sorry, Drew, I didn't want to cut you off.
Yeah, but I think I agree with Dr. Warrior, and it also acknowledges the work that your staff has done, and not to just say, you know, it is. I like what Dr. Warrior is saying. Let's take that which is relevant and let the courts know about it, and admit that certain things were not being able to be monitored.
I think the most appropriate way to do that is to provide that information in an update, and then maybe have the equity committee, here's where we can provide information, provide a condensed report. And very, very condensed in these particular areas. Work was done changes in practice, but we have no reliable data to determine impact. And that's just the truth.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, but it's the truth. In other areas, recruitment, retention, progress, no progress based on information we do have, and that's just an evaluation of the equity committee.
So I would like to delegate that back to the individual parties, since it has to be done in January. Because I'm not going to stick my committee with this. So
ran
you have
for
Dr.
president.
Warrior here,
I'm sorry, Dr.
We just, the equity
Jackie, she
committee
threw you under the
delegated
bus.
back to the two parties.
sorry, I'm not hearing you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And don't take for granted that Ms. Green gonna run for cover. She's gonna assist, so. Yeah, so we'll work this out. We got, what, 5 days, 6 days?
So let me just summarize. A report that goes this Friday indicating quarterly meetings, collectively agreed upon agendas, the time frame: March, June, September, and December, aligned to the reporting windows for the state, for the court. Also letting them know that we will in January submit the annual report based on the information that we have available, and will collectively work on a very specific approach that does in fact acknowledge the volume of work the district has done to change and set equity as a priority in this district with very little academic outcome data. That will be go to the court, and then January we start anew with the quarterly meetings. I said March, but I think another coming together of the, I don't want to make any more work for anybody. But maybe this group coming together in January may be a good place to start, because we don't have goals. We don't have some of these structures of where we want to work on collectively. Just this one time in January, come back together to kind of set expectations for the work. And that's just a
Well,
recommendation.
Yeah, if I could add to that, because what we're agreeing to is a minimum of quarterly meetings, not a maximum. So by adding a meeting in January, we're keeping our quarterly meetings, we're adding an additional one. There's nothing about that that is not permissible or is not being agreed on. There are a lot of things that have to happen in January. To that end, what we agreed to, and what you just outlined is the report that will go to the court next week. The other outline I'm asking for is also what the other things that we've agreed to, unless it's the same thing, unless it's the same as is going to the court, but the things we've agreed to in this meeting, because I think there's some additional things. We've talked about tweaking the joint plan. We've talked about what's going to, setting agendas, what's going to happen in the quarterly meetings, who's going to produce the reports moving forward, and a variety of other things. That documentation I'd like to see as an outcome of this meeting that the NAACP and the board agreed to, so we start that process of beginning to talk in the same language, that we're having the same agreements, that when we've had the meetings, we're coming out of them with the same understanding. And I'd like to create that as a regular practice. Would you agree with that, Mr. Brown?
Yeah.
And that if someone on your staff can produce that, send it to the board, send it to Mr. Brown, we can both have input and say, yes, this is what we heard, or in addition, we heard this, or whatever it was, so that we produce a document as a result of this meeting that's very clear moving forward, so we continue to document our agreements every time we meet and we're together, and we both sign off on it.
Mr. Barefoot?
Dr. Jones.
One thing I've really noticed with being a new school board member, when I would look at this before, it was like the district giving the report on what we've done and what we've done well. So in other words, we're evaluating ourselves instead of, I really, really like, whether it's status report or wherever we are on this, that the equity committee does this with the collaboration of the NAACP and the school board, because it's almost like I was grading myself when that happened. And I guess the one last question I want to ask Tony is, do you trust this, or are we going to move on?
where I've been texting and doing a lot of stuff, I think we incumbent that we give it a try.
Okay.
But we reserve the right, as always. And the only thing, so that we won't stay here all night, going back to Dr. Moxley, and it's in my spirit and it's biased, and I admit that, there was something she put in that document is about the equity department. And it has not come to fruition. And I think it can help the equity committee, it can help the NAACP, it can help the school district, because if, I read an article, and I think I might have sent it to you, Dr. Jones, where it was the new thing in school districts a while back, a few months ago, that all school districts were evolving, and Dr. Ronson and all of those in Fort Lauderdale, they gave a presentation at the NAACP conference, and they were like a well-oiled team. They had all asked, Mrs. Pender was there, and you met some of them here. What her name, Dr. Oh, Lord, Osgood, wasn't that her name? She was a part of that group, and they was a part of the district, but they was independent thinkers who thought outside the box and did what the school district couldn't do for the school district with the authority of the school district, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
But a lot of districts was, and I think Dr. Moxley was seeing a visionary, and you all were part of it when you told her to do so, but I never saw or heard anything about it, which we need that now, especially with the division in our country. Even when we talk about African-American history. And not the fact that it should have been part of our curriculum long ago, but people were blocking it. But if we got a gatekeeper or somebody that's going to hold us responsible, like I told Dr. Jones, she knew when I was with Sebastian, if a kid had to go to mentoring or tutoring, it was my job to get him off the field. So on Thursdays, any of you in football know that's walkthrough. Yeah. That's the day before the game. The coaches want all of the players there. So his starting defensive back needs to go to tutoring. It was my job to snatch him off and send him on the tutoring. Coach Belter would look at me funny, but if you don't want me to do it, take the job. You need those kind of people to help hold you accountable in a department such as that. Irregardless of how you do it, is paramount if this district going to move in the right direction in this area of equality, diversity, and dealing with the desegregation order in the joint plan. It's just my 2 cents. But it was if you go back into your minutes, it was part of that meeting that we had, that Kumbaya time when all of us was happy with each other. It came up there, and it was part of that, you all presented it to Dr. Moxley to do. Just wanted it out there, because, I serve God. I ain't got time to be mad at nobody.
So we have some agreement.
Yep.
Is there anything else that needs to be last chance? Well, I thank you for great conversation. I think we've made a lot of progress. And last thing I would like to say is have happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year, all of those nice things. And we will get started in the new year down a new path. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
And meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.